Quite a while ago now, the story last took us through the Faye Lau Manhunt, where after we had taken down her 4 rogue agents, we caught up with her as she was attempting to flee the area, following her murder of President Ellis. While I believe there is enough information to say otherwise, the general message that the story was trying to get across is that we had killed her. And since then, we've pretty much had nothing. However, finally after all this time, it has been confirmed that we'll be getting a further extension to the story. But in what direction? Nothing has officially been released. After playing through the first week of the PTS, there have been a couple of hints that have been uncovered towards the story of the upcoming Season 9 content. Those with a keen eye would have noticed something new under the comms section, a new manhunt called Hidden Alliance, where we have another 21 collectibles to find. While this doesn't mean a huge amount on its own, we also need to consider what we've been able to play during the PTS. Countdown. Near the end of the game mode, just before you extract, you are greeted by the Black Tusk, who are being supported by a group of hunters. Although this isn't new, as we saw this in the Barden Schaefer manhunt, where a single hunter who was referred to as the Asset by Natalia Sokolova when talking to Barden Schaefer, there was a shadow of a doubt as to whether the hunters were actually working with the Black Tusk, or it was just a one-off hunter who had broken away from the group, acting on his own. However, this seems to have been clarified by the Countdown game mode, showing quite a number of different hunters fighting alongside them. This is further supported by the killed by message that pops up when killed by one of the hunters. As you can see, it shows not just the hunter logo, but the Black Tusk logo as well. It also labels them as Black Tusk. So the most obvious conclusion as to why the upcoming manhunt is called Hidden Alliance would be that the hunters have now fully teamed up with the Black Tusk, and that we'll be seeing a lot more of them. But what if this is too obvious? We've already assumed that this was the case following the Barden Schaefer manhunt. Maybe there is another alliance that's about to be formed, something that we don't expect. Yes, if you couldn't tell by now, this is going to be another one of those videos where I dust off the old tinfoil hat and spin some wild speculations on where the Hidden Alliance manhunt could take the story. It has been quite a while since the Schaefer manhunt, so a lot of people have probably forgotten that he wasn't killed in that fight, just critically injured. Up until this point, he's been held captive by the SHD, and while we all know that he was working with Sokolova, perhaps he didn't know the full story. Natalia Sokolova grew up in Russia. Her father, Alexei Sokolov, was an industrialist who remarried to an American woman and moved to the US with Natalia's younger half-brother, Felix, while Natalia stayed behind to run the business. After her father's death, Natalia inherited his fortune. Felix was forced to join the Navy by his father, and after studying medicine at university, he was recruited by the SHD. There is a good chance that Natalia was aware of the SHD long before the outbreak. For unknown reasons, she would go on to form the Black Tusk, who have been largely responsible for the events that have happened since before the outbreak even occurred. So what does this have to do with Barden Schaefer? Well, Barden comes from a family with a long and proud tradition of serving their country. Since the age of 19, he was enlisted with the United States Army, where he quickly rose through the ranks. He served multiple tours of Iraq and Afghanistan, and was widely respected by the men under his command. Barden is a true patriot, and he believes in doing what is best for his country over everything else. After retiring from the army, Barden was made an offer to join a PMC called the Black Tusk. Before their operation against the United States government began, Barden was convinced that the country needed saving from the corruption coming within, that their job was to remove the rotten core and reinstate leadership that would bring the US back to its former glory. Barden's involvement with Natalia was likely to be relatively minimal up until this manhunt. He had his own commanding officer to report to. But even if it wasn't, it's unlikely that she had shared her true intentions with him. Not that we know exactly what those are, but it can be safe to assume that it's likely to be a Russia versus US type situation, as this follows a lot of the Tom Clancy's narrative, and the Division story was inspired by his work. Plus, if her story has anything to do with it, she does have the potential there to have some sort of beef with the United States. Her father did presumably divorce her mother and remarry to an American woman, who then took him and her younger brother away to the US, where eventually she would be convicted of murdering Natalia's father. The Hidden Alliance could be that Barden Schaefer learns of Natalia's true intentions against the country that he loves, and breaks away, bringing with him a large portion of the Black Tusk that are loyal to him. So we could be seeing a more balanced conflict in the days ahead, where we'll see the Division, Barden, and the Black Tusk versus Natalia, the remaining Black Tusk, and the Hunters. This alliance could also involve someone who may or may not still be alive, Faye Lau. It wouldn't be one of my speculation videos if I didn't give any really out there ideas. I talked about this in a previous video, but what if Aaron Keener isn't really dead? A lot of us have been mourning the potential death of our favourite antagonist, especially when considering the disappointing direction his story took. In the cutscene where Keener dies, we see the player agent and Kelso, who was talking to him, trying to understand what he had just done with his watch, when suddenly Isaac announces, "Rogue agent deceased." The agents then leave the scene, without so much as even checking his pulse. While I struggle to believe that everything we saw in that cutscene was everything that happened, that Keener's body was just left as is, that a character of his importance wouldn't have been extracted by the JTF later on to be examined, it certainly wouldn't be the first time that a villain has been brought back from the dead. Hornet is the most obvious example of this, but Hornet was a minor character at this stage, and him suddenly being alive didn't really have that much impact on the story. A major character like Keener coming back from the dead just seems a little bit too comic book and overused. However, I can see both sides of this argument. We're definitely supposed to believe he's dead, but there are a few pieces to the story that could explain how he could still be alive. That actually isn't too unrealistic regarding the narrative direction. The first question, do we know that we actually killed Keener in the first place? We certainly killed someone who sounded like Keener, someone who we assume looked like Keener. I'm not going down the path of body doubles or surgical manipulation or anything, but there is the possibility that the man who died on the dock wasn't actually the man himself. I mean, our agents have never actually met Keener face to face. Agents that had either joined him or were killed. We've only heard from him through recordings and grainy videos and echoes, which to be fair he looked quite different in a number of them. However, before I get too crazy with all of this and start digging way into the conspiracy theories, let's jump back to the story. Before we landed on Liberty Island, we confronted Keener's rogue agents, one of them being Theo Parnell. Theo was a tech genius, and while we were actively hunting him down, he proved time and time again that Isaac couldn't be trusted. He showed how easy it was to manipulate the AI into doing, reporting, and saying whatever he wanted it to. This is a big part of how Theo's special tech, the decoy, works. Following on from Theo's death, Keener, or whoever we were fighting, showed again how easy it was to control Isaac by having it relay anything that he wanted it to, straight into our earpieces. It's entirely possible that Theo and Keener had orchestrated the whole plan, that we, the agents, were meant to catch up with Keener on the island and take him down, or at least think we had. So what was the point in faking his death? To buy himself some time, similar to what he did on the West Side Piers, to create a distraction while he continued with his plans. Except, through having everyone think he was dead, the Division and Black Tusk would no longer be looking for him, turning their complete attention on each other. Perhaps things were getting a little too hot for him after his betrayal of the Black Tusk, and this was his contingency plan to get the heat off his back, and the only other person that knew of this was Theo, which is why Keener was happy to let him die at the hands of the Division. From here, Keener may be continuing to build his network of rogues. When you think about it, we've only met so many so far. There are likely hundreds, if not thousands more of them out there. Don't get me wrong, I'm really not a fan of the whole "surprise, he isn't dead" idea, but I certainly wouldn't be upset if Keener comes back into the picture. He was definitely one of the more interesting characters of the story, and this could help us understand the unusual direction his character took at the end there. But if they do go down this path, they'd have to do it right, because personally, and I know for a lot of others too, this could break the immersion of the story if it was done half-assed. There are a number of holes in the story that would need to be plugged in order to have this work. So perhaps this hidden alliance is between Keener and the Division. He was always more aware of what was going on in the government than the rest of us, and about the Black Tusk and their motives. Maybe now that the SHD has finally caught up with what is happening, it is now time for Keener to resurface and bring them in on his plans. As I said at the beginning, I think the most likely direction this will go will be around Natalia, the Black Tusk, and their alliance with the Hunters. I think this season will be one that is centered around the Hunters. It's likely we'll be receiving a lot more information about them and their origins, though not everything. There will still be an air of mystery around them. This also doesn't confirm to me that the Hunters are Black Tusk, just that they're working with them. The leading argument is still that they potentially have origins in Russia in some form. Anyway, I think I've been down the rabbit hole for long enough now, so I think I'll wrap this one up before I completely lose the plot. On the plus side, hopefully this has helped refresh your memory on some of what has happened in the story up until now. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers!